I received a notification from my bank that my credit card had an outstanding balance, and I needed to clear it immediately to avoid deactivation. The customer service representative mentioned that the payment hadn't been processed, and I thought I had enough funds set aside in my account for automatic payments. But when I checked my balance, it shocked me. It was only $2. The only other person with access to this account was my husband. In a rush of urgency, I grabbed my phone, planning to report the situation to the police. My name is Shirley, I'm 29, and I work as a web designer. I enjoy the flexibility of my job, allowing me to set my own hours. While I could meet clients virtually, I prefer face-to-face meetings because they help me communicate my ideas more clearly. As deadlines approach, I often work late into the night, sacrificing sleep to stay productive. Luckily, my husband Matthew is incredibly supportive and helps me manage the stress. We've been married for a year, having met a couple of years ago when I was working on a project for his company where he was the liaison. After 2 years of dating, we tied the knot, and he moved into my apartment. However, recently, a new financial concern has arisen, one that's causing tension between us. Matthew's parents have always been somewhat careless with money, and I've noticed that their financial problems seem to be affecting our own. Since my income is higher, I pay the bills at the start of the month, and Matthew reimburses me for his share once he gets paid. But this month, when I asked him about his contribution, he seemed unusually agitated. "Money's tight right now," he said. "Can I pay you back after my next paycheck?" Confused, I pressed him. "What do you mean by tight? I'm only asking for half of the bills." He hesitated before replying, "I'm strapped for cash until my next payday." It was only 8 days since his last paycheck, and I couldn't understand why he was short. When I asked him why he couldn't pay, he finally admitted, "I've been helping my parents out. They're having some financial trouble, so I sent them some money." Matthew's parents were supposed to be financially stable. His father worked full-time, and his mother worked part-time. I couldn't understand why they suddenly needed support, but why do they need money? They're both working, and this hasn't been an issue before. Matthew's answer caught me off guard. "I've been helping them for a while now. They asked for more money this month, and I agreed." While I understood the importance of helping family, this was unsettling. "All right," I said, trying to stay calm. "Just make sure you pay your share by the end of the month." Matthew can be very stubborn, and once he makes up his mind, it's hard to change it. I chose not to press further and decided to wait for his next paycheck. But since that conversation, things have only gotten worse. Matthew has been coming up with excuse after excuse to avoid paying his share of our household expenses. The stress this has caused in our relationship has been building. When he does contribute, it's only a fraction of what's needed. It's been almost 8 months since he's been pulling his weight, and my patience is running thin. I'm handling all the bills, all the chores, and it's starting to wear me down. One late evening, Matthew came home, his face flushed from alcohol. I couldn't hold my frustration back any longer. "Why didn't you call if you were going to be out drinking?" I asked, my voice rising. "I made dinner and waited for you." His response was casual. "Sorry, a colleague invited me out unexpectedly." I snapped. "Couldn't you have sent a message? I've asked you before to keep me informed. It's not fair to leave me hanging." "Don't start yelling the moment I walk in," he shot back. I was stunned. "What do you mean? Why am I the one being blamed?" His expression, filled with disdain, was like a slap in the face. It only intensified my anger. "How can you afford to go out drinking when you can't even contribute to our bills? I'm exhausted too, working every day and doing all the household chores. If you can't contribute financially, can we at least stop sending money to your parents?" Matthew bristled. "What? That's my family's business, not yours." I felt the sting of his words. "What about us, Matthew? Aren't we family too? What am I to you? We're living here together, married. This is so frustrating." His response was dismissive. "You earn more than I do anyway." That was the last straw. His sense of entitlement was infuriating. The only reason he can live so comfortably is because I've been shouldering all the financial responsibilities. But his behavior and attitude lately made me question how sustainable this situation is. As I've been covering all the expenses, I couldn't help but wonder, would a simple thank you or an apology for all the inconvenience be too much to ask? His irrational arguments left me speechless. In that moment, I realized there was no point in trying to have a rational conversation. So, I suggested we talk again tomorrow. The next evening, as I was preparing dinner and waiting for Matthew to return, I heard the front door creak open. "Welcome home," I said, trying to mask the frustration in my voice. I called out, but there was no response. Just as I was about to turn away, the living room door swung open, and to my shock, there stood Matthew with his parents. "Mom, Dad, what brings you here?" I asked, taken aback. Matthew, wearing a smug grin, responded, "My parents have something they want to discuss with you. Let's get to the point." He urged them to speak. My father-in-law, looking a bit apologetic, began, "We came to talk about the financial support Matthew has been providing us." "What's this about?" I asked, confused. "Oh, Shirley," Matthew's mother interrupted, her voice sharp and unexpected. "Could you please ease up on Matthew? He's been sending us money every month, helping with our well-being. It's unfair for you to accuse him." "I'm just asking for our living expenses to be managed properly," I replied, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Listen, Shirley," my father-in-law cut in. "I hate to bring this up, but we're practically family, aren't we? If your own family were struggling, wouldn't you lend a hand? That's what anyone would expect, right?" Matthew's mother chimed in, "Your father-in-law and I have been facing financial strain lately, and we rely on Matthew to continue supporting us. Therefore, you should handle all the living expenses for both of you." The assumption that I should bear the full financial burden was staggering. The idea that I was expected to carry the entire weight of our expenses without any consideration for how it affected our marriage was deeply troubling. I realized that this wasn't just about money, it was about respect and boundaries within our family. I couldn't take it anymore. Enough is enough. What do you think I've been doing? I manage all the household chores and cover every single expense. How is that fair? Isn't that what married couples are supposed to do? Support each other? Or are you just that selfish? When Matthew's mother scoffed at me, I noticed my husband chuckling beside me, unable to contain himself. Despite my attempts to bring reason into the conversation, they remained stubborn and left well after 1 a.m. Once they were gone, the tension in the house was palpable. Matthew, without a word, coldly handed me signed divorce papers. Shocked, I asked, "What's this?" "It means exactly what it says," he replied sharply, looking down at me. "If you persist in defying me, I'll end our marriage." "Are you serious?" I asked, incredulous. "Absolutely," he said, his tone unyielding. "If you don't want a divorce, then simply obey. Your role is to follow, not lead." I knew I should have stood my ground, but I felt utterly drained. Perhaps trying to reason with Matthew had been futile. Maybe divorce was the inevitable solution. The next day, I signed the divorce papers he had given me and headed to City Hall. The process was quick, and just like that, I was single again. Free from the constraints of my marriage, I felt a surge of relief and empowerment. It was time to embrace independent living fully. Feeling rejuvenated, I treated myself to a shopping trip. Working from home with limited outings, especially after the recent financial strain, I hadn't splurged on myself in quite some time. Today marked a new beginning. Determined to make it a special day, I headed to the women's clothing section of the department store. After trying on a few dresses, I felt the first real sense of freedom I had in months. I selected 2 of my favorite items, and at the checkout, I handed over my credit card. But the cashier's troubled expression made my heart drop. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice apologetic. "It seems we're unable to process this card." "What? That's impossible," I replied, bewildered. "I just used it recently to buy a new tablet for work without any issues." "Why the sudden problem?" Flustered, I rushed home and immediately called the card company. After explaining the situation, the operator delivered some disturbing news. "We require immediate payment of the outstanding balance, or your card will be rendered unusable." "Outstanding balance," I echoed, confused. "I paid everything last month. Why am I hearing about this now?" "We were able to debit your card usage from your account last month," the operator continued. "Could you please verify your bank account balance?" I ended the call, my mind racing. I quickly logged into my bank account online, the very account that funded my card transactions, which I had once reserved for personal savings. If my memory served me right, there should have been $8 million in that account, but when I checked, my balance read 0. Just days before the card's due date, the entire $8 million had been withdrawn. What was happening? A chilling suspicion gripped me. Could it have been Matthew? But who else had access? Our bank book and ATM card were kept together, accessible only to both of us. Matthew was the only one who could have withdrawn the money. When he returned home, I confronted him. Did you withdraw money from my account? He smirked, then let out a frustrated sigh, clearly irritated. Oh, you figured it out, huh? I thought I did a pretty good job of covering my tracks. I can't believe this, I whispered, stunned. Why would you do that? For my parents, of course, he said nonchalantly. I gave them your $8 million. What? His words hit me like a ton of bricks. He had given away my entire savings to his parents under the guise of needing financial support. Despite the shock, I managed to keep my composure as Matthew continued, his voice almost dripping with a sense of pride. It turns out my parents got addicted to online shopping, he explained. What started as a little splurge turned into an obsession. They weren't just buying necessities. They were purchasing luxuries, accumulating duplicates of expensive items, and even handing them out to neighbors like they were hosting some kind of giveaway. Their monthly expenses ballooned to a ridiculous $750,000, way beyond my reach. I stared at him, speechless as he casually dropped the bombshell. Desperate, I dipped into your savings, he continued. I had to, $8 million to cover their excesses. You took $8 million. I asked, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. He shrugged dismissively. You shouldn't be upset. After all, they're practically your family too. Think of it as helping out the family. It's just $8 million. No need to make such a big deal out of it. That was the last straw. I dialed the police immediately, my voice steady as I reported the theft. Matthew's eyes widened in disbelief as I ended the call. What are you doing? Did you just call the cops? He demanded. Of course I did, I shot back, unwavering. We've just been robbed, haven't we? He sputtered. This is an exaggeration. It's my house too. I cut him off, standing firm. Actually, we're divorced now. This apartment is leased under my name only. Technically, it's not your home anymore. Remember those divorce papers you signed yesterday? They've already been filed. This place is mine. The tension between us thickened as Matthew, still in denial, struggled to grasp the gravity of the situation. You've got to be kidding me. Call them back and cancel the report, he pleaded, his voice rising in disbelief. I waved my phone at him menacingly. If you lay a finger on me, I'll call the cops again. Just so you know, they're already on their way. You can't escape now. Why don't you just admit what you've done? Desperation flashed in his eyes as he tried to appeal to our past. Wait, hold on, we loved each other, didn't we? How did it come to this? Love each other, I scoffed, my voice thick with scorn. Don't try to feed me that nonsense. Think about it. Whose fault do you think all of this is? It all started because you blindly supported your irresponsible parents. You can't just act recklessly and expect forgiveness. Who would forgive someone as despicable as you? Stunned by my words, Matthew tried to deflect. What a fool. Do you even know who you're talking to? Yes, I'm talking directly to you. I shot back, my voice cold. Like parents, like child. You were raised by people who were careless with money, and now you think it's acceptable to deplete someone else's savings. I hope the police give you a stern lecture and make you feel the weight of those $8 million. Just then, the sound of sirens grew louder, and the doorbell rang, cutting through the heated exchange. The police entered, and Matthew's bravado dissolved completely. He crumbled, a shadow of the person he once was. Who's the suspect? An officer asked, glancing between us. I pointed at Matthew, now a pathetic figure on the floor. It's him without a doubt. All right, let's go. You need to come in for questioning, the officer commanded. Matthew, pale and wide-eyed with fear, stammered, all I wanted was to support my parents. His voice trailed off as the reality of the situation sank in. He was led away, his protests ignored. But the saga didn't end there. Despite my clear statement and the evidence I provided, the authorities later informed me that the incident was considered a civil matter. They explained that the legal boundaries prevented them from taking more drastic action, as it was essentially a financial dispute within a marriage. Frustrated but determined, I realized the police couldn't provide the resolution I needed. The next step was clear. I would seek legal assistance to address the betrayal and recover the substantial funds taken from me. I needed a strategy. Not just for the immediate recovery of my assets, but to ensure that such a flagrant violation of trust and financial security would never happen again. I demanded compensation for the misappropriation of my $8 million savings, totaling $10 million in damages. Naturally, Matthew and his parents couldn't afford such a sum. In the end, they found themselves drowning in debt. Despite their precarious situation, his parents continued their reckless spending, accumulating even more debt, eventually borrowing from loan sharks. They lived in constant fear of relentless debt collectors, always trying to stay out of sight. Contrary to their downward spiral, I made the bold decision to sever all ties with Matthew. I moved out and relocated to a new apartment, a fresh start that turned out to be the best decision for my peace of mind and career growth. Surprisingly, my career began to thrive. My income soon surpassed my wildest expectations. Since parting ways with Matthew, everything in my professional life seemed to fall perfectly into place. In hindsight, I regretted not divorcing him sooner. The failure of my marriage, though painful, was a profound lesson. It taught me that my life was far from over and that I had the resilience to recover and rebuild. I resolved to exercise greater caution in my future endeavors, ensuring that my financial and emotional well-being was never compromised again. This period of my life, though fraught with challenges, underscored the importance of independence and the strength that comes from decisively moving forward from difficult situations.